How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock.
Cinema Shock. It's Cinema Shock, Gary.
Did you just forget the name of the podcast? The other day when I was watching through the Matrix movies, and I was trying to find our podcast for some reason, and
it's not in the Matrix movies, Gary.
And I was typing in
not,
Psychotronic Film Society again. I was like, I was drunk, but I was trying to seek out Psychotronic Film Society. It's a rough life, I lead. Anyway, welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the show celebrating the past, present, future.
Now he's doing his wrestling show podcast. Oh my God. Welcome to Cinema Shock. This is a bonus episode. I'll do Gary's job for him. That's Gary Horne, the guy who doesn't know how to do his job.
Thank you.
I'm Justin Bishop.
And I'm Todd A. Davis.
And today we're doing a bonus episode. We didn't promise a bonus episode, but we said we might do one. We hinted that there might be one. We alluded that there might be one if we could all get our shit together.
We promised you that when we said we're going to go deep inside the Wachowskis, that we would really get deep. So this is part of it. We're
Why
just
do you have to make it dirty? Why do you have to make it dirty? Yeah. So if you're a fan of the Matrix franchise, you're probably familiar with what we're talking about today. It probably doesn't come to a surprise to fans of that film. But I feel like this is a movie that doesn't get talked about that much anymore. I mean, it was kind of it was a pretty big deal at the time it came out, but it was very unique at the time. Now there's a lot of stuff kind of like this, like if the Matrix were being produced now in 2021, the studio behind it, Warner Bros, would go immediately in a post Marvel world. Warner Brothers would immediately go into extended universe mode, just the same way that Disney's doing Marvel or Star Wars. I think that if the Matrix were being released now, Warner Brothers would try to explore and exploit kind of every corner of the Matrix universe that they could.
I think they actually accomplished that to a certain extent, with their stuff. I mean,
yeah, but the infrastructure wasn't there at the time.
Sure, right.
You didn't have streaming services and things like that would make doing that kind of thing so much easier. And also, there wasn't a precedent for creating spin-off movies or TV shows and things like that at the time.
I was about to say, if you think about even like Star Wars Episode 1, coming out at the same time as the Matrix, that was like the first Star Wars thing in forever,
in like 15 years.
And they definitely, and it was just about the new 3 episodes that were going to be coming out over the years.
Right
now you have a Star Wars movie every single year, a new Marvel movie every single year,
a new Marvel movie every 3 months. This year.
A new Marvel movie every 3 months, and then there's TV shows, and comics and everything. The Wachowskis, of course, would love to have all that, but that was, like Justin said, no precedent for that.
Yeah, in the first film, it does tease a lot of potential, both in the world outside of what we see in the film and in the backstory. Morpheus tells the story, but we never see the story. The backstory that leads to the future world that the humans are living in. But then in 2003, Wachowskis, once again ahead of the curve, attempted to do something similar, something that had never really been done before, with a direct-to-DVD anthology film called The ANIMATRIX.
From the creators of the Matrix trilogy, what is the ANIMATRIX?
We know the truth now.
Experience the extraordinary fusion of CG animation and Japanese anime in a groundbreaking collection of 9 animated stories. from 7 visionary directors that takes the world of the Matrix to its unimaginable limits.
I'm going back to the Matrix, and I want you to come with me.
A mind-bending excursion into the world of the Matrix.
I really think this was, it seems maybe to some of our younger listeners like this is not a big deal, which is why we're going to keep repeating that. But this was a pretty groundbreaking idea in its time in 2003, because I don't know, I can't think of any other franchise in film history that attempted to expand on the universe of a film in quite the same way that this did, where you told side stories, some of which are connected to the main film, many of which are not. I think honestly, the closest, going back to Star Wars, the closest I can think of is those awful Ewok made for TV movies that came out in the 80s.
They did one for Ewoks and they did one for droids, if I recall.
Well, the droids was a cartoon, wasn't it? Yeah, there were 2 live action Ewok movies.
Oh, the live action. Yeah.
They were bad.
Yeah.
But development on the Animatrix kind of started back when the Wachowskis were visiting Japan to promote the first Matrix movie. So while they were there in the country, they visited a lot of the creators of the anime films that had so strongly influenced the Matrix, the film. And they decided they were going to collaborate with them on a project that would expand upon the world of the Matrix. So the project itself was conceived by and overseen by the Wachowskis, who wrote 4 of the film's 9 segments, although they did not direct any of the animation at all themselves. The majority of the animation was overseen by notable animators and directors from the world of Japanese anime. And then the release strategy for the shorts was kind of unconventional as well, because they didn't just drop it all at once. So again, there's no streaming service or anything. So what they did is they put 4 of the shorts out prior to the release of the second Matrix movie, before Reloaded. They put 4 of the shorts on the official Matrix website. I think it was whatisthematrix.com or something like that. But they put 4 of these shorts on that website, while Final Flight of the Osiris was actually released in theaters. And then the remaining shorts were released on DVD in June of 2003, which is a month or so after the release of The Matrix Reloaded. So actually the majority of people saw this in between Matrix 2 and 3. And that strategy was sort of genius on a few fronts. For one, releasing those 4 shorts online ahead of time helped to generate hype for the sequels, which were astronomically expensive to produce. Like we'll talk about this when we do our episode on the sequels, but even in comparison to the first film, the 2 sequels were incredibly expensive. And then Final Flight of the Osiris was actually released in front of another Warner Brothers film, the Stephen King adaptation, Dreamcatcher. You guys remember Dreamcatcher with a shit weasel?
Oh yeah.
Fuck me, it's Freddy. I still say that. Fuck me, Freddy, and that's Jason Lee's line through that whole movie.
Yeah, I did it. Yeah, it's a pretty bad movie.
Yeah, it's not good.
It was at the time described by at least one critic as, quote, unspeakably bad.
Yeah,
Dreamcatcher is not a good movie. It's one of those bad movies that's still kind of fun to watch, but it's pretty awful.
Well, with it being Stephen King, it kind of sets a tone and doesn't follow through with that.
I mean, it's
tone.
not as if it's not a great StephenKing book.
No,
I mean, if we're going to get into Dreamcatcher, this is the first book that he wrote after almost dying, after he got hit by a van and almost died.
Yeah,
he was not writing for a long time, and this was the first book that came back. And so I think it's just a bit of a mess, because I don't know, I'm not going to get into Stephen King's psyche at the time, but it's a bit of a mess. Yeah. But it was getting pretty bad reviews. So by putting a Matrix tie-in before the film, it was actually able to help boost Dreamcatcher's box office even after it had been panned by most critics and audiences.
I went to see it in the theaters pretty much.
I mean, I did too.
Solely for Flight of the Osiris.
Did you?
Yeah, I did.
A lot of audience members did the same thing. They bought tickets solely to see the short, much like audiences had bought tickets to meet Joe Black a couple years prior to get their first glimpse of the Phantom Menace. Do you guys remember that? They were promoting the Phantom Menace. First trailer was attached to Meet Joe Black, and people were going and watching, or buying tickets at least, to meet Joe Black, watching the Phantom Menace trailer and then leaving.
Well, I did the same thing, not for that, but I did the same thing for Batman Begins. when it was attached to, I think the trailer was attached to I Am Legend.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing. And yeah.
Now you just go on the internet and watch trailers.
Yeah, exactly.
It was so weird. I remember when you had to go to like Apple, like their website.
Yep.
And you watch
Apple trailers.
Yeah.
And then in the pre-YouTube days.
Oh yeah.
Pretty crazy.
So I think, as with most anthology films, Animatrix is a little hit and miss. I think it's a little more hit than miss, but even its misses are packed with some pretty fascinating sci-fi ideas. And when it excels in its best segments, I think what it does best is it fleshes out the world of the Matrix in ways that even the official live action sequels were not able to do. So I think the best way to handle this, fellas, is just segment by segment. Talk about what we think about each one, starting with, of course, Final Flight of the Osiris, the first segment in the film. Final Flight of the Osiris is the one that ties in most blatantly to the events of the second Matrix movie, because the Osiris, the ship, is actually discussed in the Matrix Reloaded.
Just briefly, but yeah.
Briefly, yes. Very briefly. But it does tie in, and I'm not sure where the writing process started on this, if that was something they did. They named it later after they had already written that into Reloaded or what. I'm really not sure. But this one was written by Lana and Lily Wachowski. And it was directed by Andrew R. Jones, who was a visual effects and animation supervisor, who he has worked on everything from like James Cameron's Titanic and Avatar. Most recently, he was the animation supervisor on Jon Favreau's Jungle Book and Lion King remakes. Oh, nice. So he's still out there. He's not generally a director, but just prior to this film, he had been the animation director on the 2001 film Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, which I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was, at the time, it boasted what was very groundbreaking computer animation. Like, people had not seen quote unquote realistic computer animation like that. It's very dated now, I think.
Yeah. And you can see a little bit of that, but still looks good. Still looks actually really good.
Yeah, I thought it looked pretty good. I mean, it looks like what you get out of a video game. I mean,
it looks like a video game.
Yeah,
it looks like a video game cut scene. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and it was actually done by Square Enix, who is a video game company.
Right.
So it was actually produced by them.
I remember Linkin Park for their remix album. They had one music video for it, and it like very clearly looked like a cutscene from Halo, and that animation was not nearly as good as this. But it's roughly around the same.
I'm sure they probably didn't have the budget that this had.
Very true. Yeah.
I guess the Wachowskis, they had seen the work done by Square Enix on Final Fantasy, and that's actually how they got involved in this. Is the Wachowskis saw The Spirits Within, sent the producers the script for Final Flight of the Osiris, hoping to kind of replicate that animation style, and they signed on for it.
Yeah. Nice. One of the big guys in this is producer Michael Aris. I think it's how you say his name, but he's some of this was all done through like Studio -4 degrees. Is that the name of it? I think that's it. And he's an American. He lives over in Japan, or at least did at the time. He was a friend of Mike Gaeta, who was production designer or whatever on
John Gaeta.
John Gaeta, sorry, and Mike Aris. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, so John Gaeta is his good buddy. So he introduced the Wachowskis over to him, and then they went to Studio -4 during some of this, and that was who kind of oversaw all of this stuff. Yeah, at least in production.
Yeah, they kind of worked with each animation studio on tied it all together basically. And Osiris, because it is computer animated, I think visually looks the most like an actual Matrix film. The filmmakers actually got digital models of the Sentinels and the Diggers, the robots, from the Matrix special effects department, and based a lot of the environments on conceptual drawings from the film. So it looks like environmentally, and the Sentinels are the exact same design, like literally from the film. So it definitely looks almost a part of the Matrix universe, whereas some of the other shorts, they vary greatly visually. So some of them look, less and less like an actual Matrix film, but that was also kind of the point of this exercise. It's not unlike what Star Wars is doing with Star Wars Visions. on Disney Plus right now. Only this is all considered canon, whereas Star Wars Visions is generally not, I believe.
Save for like close-ups of, you know, the faces of the characters. If you didn't know, you might not recognize that it's not. It's really well done. It's very well done. I really enjoyed it.
Some of the making of stuff talks about that, you know, like animating flesh is different, you know, for CGI. It's interesting, like getting into the technical details, but not to get too into the weeds of it. But I think the story Andrew R. Jones tells is about, like, you know, animating an egg. There's like just the shell, and then but inside, you know, there's stuff. So with like flesh, it moves differently, and so like you have like blood and muscle and all of this stuff. So it's kind of interesting just seeing like how more confident they were from Spirits Within into this. And they
Spirits Within, they specifically had everyone wear like long sleeves and like showing as little flesh as possible. And he reads the script on this one, and that first opening scene, the two main characters are half naked, you know, like the whole time. So he couldn't really get around it.
Yeah. And
CGI butt.
CGI butt. Yeah. I was like, this is a really horny episode, Wachowskis. And I'm sure that they came up with all of this.
I mean, you know, there are sex simulations within the Matrix, and those people on those ships are getting in there.
well, he even the one kid even hits at it with the lady in red in the first one.
You're right. He's a cyber pimp.
They actually, in one of the cut scenes of the video game, they actually show where there's basically, it looks like the size of a record player, but it actually sits behind a bed, and you basically plug in for a one room, basically puts you into a single room environment to do whatever. And
the horny holodeck.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, but he definitely, you know, you were talking about the order of events or whatever, not knowing when they got this, but he says it was like right after Spirits Within that he got the script for it. And
yeah, like they were still wrapping up, I think.
Yeah, and so what they did was they got that they got the Sentinels designs and everything, and they put the girl from Spirits Within. If you look at some of the making of stuff, they got Aki, I think is her name. Yeah, they did like a little test thing, and she's like fighting a Sentinel.
Yeah, which technically within the world of the Matrix, she would not be able to do.
Yeah, that would not be happening. But I guess it's just to show they could do it. And
and it looks good. Yeah, they changed her hair, gave her a short haircut, and put her in an outfit that looks a little more Matrixy, something like more like something what Trinity would wear, and has her fight a Sentinel, and it's pretty cool to watch.
But yeah, and you appreciate that they use like all of that, probably Jeff Darrow conceptual drawings and stuff to like make up all the mechanics and stuff. But you know, the Osiris is like, I looked that up. It was like the Egyptian Queen of the Dead or God of the Deceased. That's what it was. And so, which is it's
not what
these
not
folks.
what I would name my ship. It seems like bad luck.
No, appropriate since they all die.
Yeah. So if you look at the voice cast for these shorts, you're going to see a lot of like really prolific voice actors, especially in this one, especially in Final Flight of the Osiris. Now, I will say that all of these were actually released in Japan as well with Japanese voice cast. So we're just going to talk about the American voice cast because that's the one that we all have access to here. But on this one, you've got Kevin Michael Richardson. Remember, we talked about him back in our Bound episode.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, he's amazing. Like he's got a resume 10 miles long. It's kind of insane of voice work that he's done. But he plays Thaddeus, the main guy in this one. And then Pamela Adlon plays Jew, which is the female that he's sparring with at the beginning. And she's best known, actually, she's a very prolific voice actor as well. She's actually best known for voicing Bobby Hill in King of the Hill. Which tickles me for some reason. And then you've got John DiMaggio, who is a legendary voice actor. He's done voices in almost every cartoon you've ever watched, if you've watched cartoons on television. But he's probably most well known for, he plays Bender on Futurama and Jake on Adventure Time.
John DiMaggio is actually my wife's cat. It's her favorite version of the Joker.
Oh yeah,
he does
Mark Hamill, huh?
Yeah, he does a really good Joker in the feature length Under the Red Hood.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah,
it's really solid.
Yeah. Then you've got Tom Kenny. He's another Adventure Time alum. He voices the Ice King, but he's most well known as a character you might have heard of named SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yes.
I wish that they had been doing the SpongeBob voice.
That would have been, that would have been, somebody's had to have gotten some of these folks just like, hey, we're just going to do your lines again. Just do it in the SpongeBob voice.
Would have been an extra star for me.
Oh, it'd been awesome.
You've also got Tara Strong, who's another voice actor who her filmography is probably as long as DiMaggio's and Kenny's. She has been in everything from like My Little Pony to Batman, the Brave and the Bold to the Powerpuff Girls. Like she is in everything. It's pretty impressive. And then there's one, Todd mentioned this before we were recording, that he had come across this information as well, but in the voice of the old woman, when they're at the mailbox, when Jew goes to mail the thing off and there's the old woman at the mailbox there, and she has a little conversation with, that's credited to an actress named Betty Ford, not the one that has the drug clinic.
Not to be confused with former First Lady Betty Ford.
Betty Ford was an actress and model who appeared on TV shows and movies all throughout the career, but most notably, at least, or most interestingly, I should say, in her career, very early on, she was on a modeling photo shoot in Bogota, Colombia, and she was introduced to a famous matador named Luis Miguel Domingan and watched him fight. And soon after, she left her home in New York for Mexico to train as a bullfighter. And she later became the first American woman to fight on foot at the Plaza Mexico, which is the largest bullfighting arena in the world, holds like 40,000 people.
Yeah.
And then she did that for a couple years, had a few fights, and then went back to acting. And she acted through the 90s and early 2000s, I think.
Yeah. And like directed by, she was in stuff directed by Eastwood. And like not just
she's in Dirty Harry.
Yeah, she's in like a bunch of
whichever the first Dirty Harry movie was.
Yeah, she's in a bunch of like really good stuff. It wasn't just kind of like, oh, I'm gonna retire from bullfighting, which that's bonkers alone.
And she's like 25 years old at this time.
Yeah,
she's retiring from bullfighting to get back into acting.
I have to say, none of that is a story I would have come up with if you'd asked me to. That's unexpected.
But such a wacky and awesome story.
What a life.
So cool. Yeah.
So do you guys, we can get into this maybe further at the end, but what do you guys think specifically about Final Flight of the Osiris? Because this is the one that I guess a lot of people consider it. Even Joel Silver referred to it as Matrix 1.5 because it kind of leads into the second film. But what do you guys think of it? Do you think it's held up over the years? Do you think its story is significant enough to tie into the film?
I feel like there's a little section of I could have easily seen this being even a little bit longer, exploring some more of the relationships on the ship, on the Osiris and things like that. But and even exploring the concept of the drop points, where like, how does, the standard blue mailbox, like how does that translate into them getting information out of the Matrix?
It's dropping little hints that you want to see explored more, which is why it would be cool if there was some sort of Matrix ongoing series or something like that.
Right. I really dig this, and some of the animation's a little wonky. We already discussed animating flesh and things like that, but overall it's a solid entry. It's a solid small chapter. I like it.
I enjoyed it fine. It's funny, the Matrix, one of the things I thought about the original that I don't even know if we got into on the episode now that I think about it, but all of the outside of the Matrix stuff, every time I watched it, I had like a little bit of a feeling of like, this is not the part that anybody wants to see. They want to see the cool shit in the Matrix. And actually in this one, I felt the opposite, because really the only thing you got in the Matrix was her running to the mailbox and them trying to strip each other down with katanas. Right. But
she does some cool, she has a cool little chase scene in there.
That's true. Yeah. There's that like her diving off the building thing that's kind of neat. But
which Trinity does the exact same move in the Matrix Reloaded, I think.
Oh yeah,
yeah, pretty much.
But I did like the outside of the Matrix stuff in this one. I thought it expanded on it a little bit, like, and
You
everything.
see
in
a
the
lot
Matrix,
more
there's-
of how things work in the real world. In this.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
which you're going to get a lot more of in the Matrix sequels anyway. So
right. And so I'm trying not to step on those, but you don't get that in the first Matrix. So you're kind of seeing like, oh, this is what the whole, it expands on that universe, and it actually makes like a cool like little spaceship fight there at one point too, you know, which is kind of fun because everything seems kind of tiny in the Matrix compared to this one as far as the real world stuff.
Right. Yeah. Because in the Matrix, you're really just seeing life on the Nebuchadnezzar,
right?
Essentially, and not everything around that. I like this one. I think the animation has not held up over the last almost 20 years. I think it still looks okay, but it's, CGI does not date well typically. And we're seeing stuff, now that's animated that's much more realistic than this. I mean, hell, most of the superhero scenes in the Marvel movies are computer animated. Like the actors, aren't actually, Tom Holland is not in that Spider-Man suit when he's zipping around New York. That's CGI.
Figured he was on a crane or something.
But you can't fault that. I mean, the technology wasn't there, and for the time, this was groundbreaking technology. This is the one that I remember the most before watching it this time, mostly because I think it was so groundbreaking at the time that it stuck in my brain, and also because it was the one that was promoted the most at the time. Which I get. This thing cost $5 million to make for this 9-minute short. Wow. Which you got to think the original Matrix was 60 million. And this is $5 million for only 9 minutes. Like if this had been expanded to a 90-minute movie, this would have been a $50 million film. So it's pretty insane. I mean, this short cost almost as much as the first film that the Wachowskis directed.
It's pretty insane.
I wish think about it that way.
Yeah. Like I don't know how much pull they had apparently at this time to like get this stuff done. It's pretty impressive.
Well, I mean, The Matrix was the highest grossing film in Warner Brothers history at the time that it came out. So Warner Brothers was willing to throw a lot of money at this. But it's funny because this whole anthology film was created as a direct to DVD thing, which would never happen now because nobody buys DVDs hardly anymore. I mean, most people are streaming. This would go to streaming now on like an HBO Max or something.
Yeah.
But at the time, the DVD market was so huge that you could just put anything out on DVD and people would buy it. Like the DVD market, it's hard to remember, I guess. It's easy for me because I was such an avid DVD collector at the time. You guys know, you saw my collection.
Oh, yes.
But I had thousands of DVDs in my house. But at the time, like DVDs were a huge market. And that's not the case now. So for people who might not have been collecting and stuff then, it's hard to imagine just how much of like this was a sure sell for Warner Brothers.
It's interesting that CGI stuff doesn't really work that well or doesn't age very well. Because I don't know, I'm trying to figure out like, you want to accept that that's like a style of animation that should translate over. What I'm thinking of is the fact that this is the one that's not, when you think of the Animatrix, you think of anime, and clearly the Wachowskis are inspired by anime. Just especially coming up, like look at some of the fight scenes, but even some of the poses that they do, like even some of like that lobby fight and stuff, just some of the angles that it's shot at and the poses that Neo's going through, like with his arms behind him with the guns and stuff. And like, it just, there's obviously a lot of anime influence in there. And so this is the least anime one of the Animatrix. And it's just interesting how that all translates. I mean, I guess all this other stuff is like traditional, or it's passed down. They're all styles that have worked. Like anime is a big deal in Japan. For anybody who doesn't know, I mean, this is like there's anime for everything, or manga for everything in Japan. So it's like an accepted style. Like people just, we're just now getting into the era of like comic books or the hottest selling thing in the world, or whatever, or at least the characters in the movies and stuff, those stories. And in Japan, this has been this way since like post World War II.
I mean, we talk about this back in our Tarantino series, where we talked about Lone Wolf and Cub, and we talked about Lady Snowblood, and how those were they were very successful comic books before they were films. That's why they got adapted into films. And this was in the 1970s, well before, literally many decades before America decided that it was a market that was worth exploiting.
Right.
Yeah, it's weird too. Like they've just had this like cool history of like woodblock stories and stuff like that. Like they've got like the real visual, I guess, the manga style or whatever. And I think even the manga they took from the quote unquote funnies from the US, but like translated into their own way of telling stories. But yeah, it's just interesting, like how embedded in their styles in this anthology seem to be the ones that hold up the best, I suppose.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the remainder of the segments are mostly pretty inspired by more traditional anime. I think Program, I think, is the one that's the most traditionally anime, but they're all much closer than Final Flight of the Osiris, including the next one, which I think is my personal favorite. I think this next one is the best segment of the film to me, especially from a storytelling standpoint. I think more than any other segment, the second Renaissance fleshes out the world of the Matrix in ways that an anthology like this should.
It's the secret origin, basically.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I was going to say, more so now that we're thinking about it, more so than Osiris, this is actually the one that matters the most.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And for some reason, it's split into parts 1 and 2. I have to imagine that has to do with a release strategy, where maybe they were released on the website, on the Matrix website. Maybe this was one of the 4 that was released on there, and they were released in 2 separate parts because of that. And that might have been due to limitations on length on the internet at the time. I'm not really sure, but it's split into parts 1 and 2. If you have the Blu-ray of the Animatrix or the DVD, they play back to back. So it's really one long short split in half, but it's one story. And this was another one that the story was written by the Wachowskis, and the film was directed by Mahiro Maeda, who is an anime director who had started his career early on animating classic Studio Ghibli films like Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, Castle in the Sky. But he was most well known at the time for a series that aired in Japan called Blue Submarine 6. Tying back to that Tarantino series, he also later did key animation on Kill Bill on the animation series there. But he was most well known at the time for Blue Submarine 6, which was a series that blended CGI and traditional 2D cell animation.
That's exactly the point to take from this one. Like, because this one does a great job of blending the two, and even Blue Submarine 6, if you look at like clips from it or watch the movie or whatever, it's even more awkward because it's like all of the ship stuff is CG, and then it's like
3D looking CG, and then the characters are very traditional 2D. But this one does have a lot of CGI in it. Basically, any element in this that's not human, like machines, vehicles, those are all rendered in CG, but they're made to look. They're like colored and lit like 2D cell animation, which you can tell sometimes. Some Futurama actually does that a lot. Where it, when you see the ship, that's CG that they make to look like cell animation, but it works really well in this, I think.
It definitely helps blend because, like Gary said, the Blue Submarine 6, it's fairly jarring.
It's very jarring
to cut back and forth. But
it's like you're watching 2 different things.
And the lighting technique here just really does help blend. It's not until you look shot to shot where you can, here it's digital, here it's ink and paint, but they do a great job of blending it here.
And I really love this one. I love the format of it. I love the like newsreel kind of footage. It makes for a very interesting viewing experience, but it's also a very fascinating story. I mean, this is the one that basically fills in all of the story that Morpheus is telling to Neo in the Matrix movie, and it's a fascinating look at it. I think you see the oppression you see the rise of AI, and then how machines, the robots kind of get mistreated,
Yeah.
and then them rising up, and you see the scorching of the sky and all this stuff
Mhm.
that Morpheus alluded to, and also stuff in between the lines of what Morpheus was talking about,
Oh yeah.
but it's really cool. I mean, it essentially becomes a story about like class warfare between the humans and the machines, and one writer I was reading about said that I was reading about this short in particular said that this was, it's a story, it's a meditation on class warfare, showing how it's ultimately inevitable and how whoever wins will exploit those who are defeated. And it's a pretty cool short. It's awesome to look at. It also builds a lot of sympathy for the villains of the Matrix, for the machines, something that is going to, I think, plays into the sequels of the Matrix pretty well, because they're more than just faceless evil. There's a lot more going on in the Matrix than what you were told in the first movie.
Yeah. And I mean, don't want to, I'm sure we don't want to get too much into the detail of each one of these story wise, but to see that the machines reached out to mankind through the United Nations, and really tried to have,
and were rejected.
Really tried to have peaceful coexistence. And it was us who were just like, no, fuck you.
Yeah. So
I love
this one. I mean, I think the animation style is incredible. I love the designs. The robot designs were actually based on a design by Jeff Darrow from a Matrix tie-in comic that he did. Specifically the one with the little mustache, the Bolt Butler, that was a Jeff Darrow design. So they based all of the robots on that design.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was apparently the only thing Maida was given was hey, just so, or at least wanted to pay homage to this has already been designed. The robots, the look of the robots have been kind of there already. So let's stick with that. And he actually, this is the one too, where they used a lot of the software that guy, Mike Aris, creates. That's what he does over in Japan. He's like a software engineer or whatever. A lot of his is the one that blended the 2D and the 3D in this one.
Right.
And apparently Maeda doesn't normally conceptualize his own characters, but was so invested in this one. That was one thing he did here, at least. And as far as the
narrator, right?
The narrator. Yeah. I was going to call, I forget what they call her.
The instructor.
That's it. Yeah. And so he has that whole Mandela at the beginning, it was a very Buddhist thing. And, but no, going back to what you were talking about, this is one of the things that I have a love-hate with the Wachowskis for some reason. I think that their humanity is super weird. And I get that it's their personality. I always think the humans in the Wachowski stuff seem sort of robotic themselves.
Sure.
And I would say that that's intentional, except I kind of felt that a little bit even in Bound. I felt everybody was kind of weird. I don't know. It was
not quite acting like people act in real life.
Yeah. Joey Pants is always the best actor. He just, at least because he seems like a real person. I don't know. He always seems like Joey Pants, but he seems like a real human being.
Right.
And,
more emotional. Exactly. And so anyway, that said, one of the things I love when they're digging into this philosophy, and especially the more you hear about them, I mean, they're really digging into issues, like real philosophical discussion. And it's not completely bland, good versus evil, or oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Or that your villain is just some nameless, faceless thing. That everybody's looking out for themselves too. And so that there's reasoning. And so there's more depth to everything.
There's a lot more complexity in that relationship between man and machine than what we're made to think in the first Matrix movie.
Well, they get into the economics of it, they started producing and exporting their own goods, and they were putting everybody out of business.
There's some pretty disturbing dystopian imagery in this. The way the machines are treated in part one before the trial, of that one machine, and also like the scene where the machine that looks like a woman, where she's being just ripped very and screaming like I'm real. Like that's pretty disturbing stuff.
Very.
That's some pretty disturbing imagery.
Well, he straight up says like, man, it's thought that the best way to do this would show like how violence repeats in the world. And there's like, there's always like these situations of like this injustice and this disturbing stuff. And that he had hoped people would connect more in this one if he could relate some of the imagery to things that have happened, like Vietnam or Tiananmen Square. Like there's the robot that's getting crushed by like the tank tracks.
You see the one that has the gun to his head. Like,
and so he was intentionally taking like moments of just like things that stand out in our minds as terrible violence that we could see here. I even think maybe it was this one, but one of them they were saying like they had started like rapping like right after 9/11 or something, or they had worked on it around that time, and so they were worried they wouldn't even be able to show some of the destruction of the buildings and stuff like that, but never got any notes, and they were like, all right, well, this is still impactful, and they went with it. But I don't know, it's just interesting. Like there was a lot of thought in this one. You could feel just like and even then that he's giving the depth or complexity to the robots, but they're also showing here that like the humans did fuck up. The humans did fuck up and they're treating them like objects. But then once they're in the war too, like that they're like, all right, well, this is, it's on now. Then they also will treat the humans like objects. And then they're just like, now you're just batteries and you're not anything that matters. Well, it's like a full circle kind of thing.
Yeah. Even seeing once they had won the war, seeing the robots experiment on human bodies and the one that's dissected. And, and
he said he took that from like how you would do a lobster. Basically, that was the idea there.
Jesus. Wow. So the next story. Well, actually, I'm going to talk about a couple different stories here. You've got kids' story and detective story.
I do want to say real quick. Sorry, Justin.
No, go ahead.
That I did right before we got on here. I was watching some kind of, I think there's like a YouTube that's just like Matrix Explained, but they were talking about the robot that's in the meeting with the world leaders that self-destructs and kills everyone or whatever, like after the robots are like basically winning. There was a whole segment on this that is the Oracle. And
that's their theory.
Yeah, that's their theory, is that's the Oracle. They had a lot of evidence like backing this whole thing around, and that what's happened is that like essentially in the movies, because I think I jumped ahead on last episode when I talked about the Matrix. I don't think that program discussion happened there. But,
no, that happens in part 2.
Yeah, but so spoiler alert, sorry. But
so spoiler alert for the episode you already listened to.
Yeah. So the Oracle is a program. And so they're basically like they're saying like they told this whole story about how the Oracle is a program that helped deliver humanity to the machines, so it has respect amongst the machines, but then is also feeling shame or regret, remorse for the humans because of how the machines are now doing exactly to the humans what the humans did to the machines, and feels like this is, and that's why she's helping humanity later. And but basically that this was a machine that was designed that was so perfectly adept at understanding human nature and understanding human decisions, and that's how it ended up being the one that struck a deal and got in there and like worked out everything. I don't know, it's pretty cool. It's interesting, but
it's really cool.
A lot of deep stuff in the Matrix.
Yeah, for real. So the next couple shorts I want to talk about are kids' story and detective story. They also tie in to the Matrix in a fairly direct way by featuring characters from the films. And they were both directed by the same person. His name is, I apologize if I mess his name up, but it is Shinichiro Watanabe. That that sound right?
That feels right.
Yeah, sounds.
I'm going to
pretty
stick with Watanabe from here.
Yeah, same. Shinichiro Watanabe. Yes, but I'm gonna say just continue with Watanabe from here on as well. But he is known most as the director of Cowboy Bebop. The Cowboy Bebop series, co-creator of that show. He was offered the choice to direct one of the scripts by the Wachowskis or to develop one of his own. They're like, you can do whatever you want. Do you want one of our scripts? Do you want to do your own script? And he had been kind of keen to write his own story, but the producers kind of strongly recommended that he do Kid's Story, which was written by the Wachowskis. And according to Watanabe, that original script by the Wachowskis only had stuff from the school on, like basically the second half of the short. And he added all of the other elements to the script himself. So he kind of reworked it a little bit. So he was making this one, and he knew it's set in an American high school. He knew nothing about American high schools. American high schools are vastly different from Japanese ones. So he actually traveled to San Francisco. He scouted a high school there and based the look of the school in the film to the one that he saw when he was visiting San Francisco. He barely changed anything other than, I think, the name of the school, but it is almost an exact recreation. Yeah, and then while in San Francisco, he also met Clayton Watson, who is the actor who plays the kid in The Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions. And he's the character that's portrayed in this story. And they actually were able to have him act out a lot of his scenes, basing their animation on his performance. And I really like the animation style of this. It was a little off-putting. It's done in this really deliberately messy hand-drawn style that Watanabe developed alongside his animation director, Shinichi Hashimoto. They kind of came up with this hand-drawn look that is very, very unique, I think. I could see a lot of people not liking it, but I kind of dig that it looks so different. And I like the way that movement is portrayed in it, especially when the kid's on the skateboard where he's trying to get away, and the way his body kind of bends and shifts around. It kind of gives you the idea that he is bending reality, even though he doesn't seem to realize what he's doing, Right.
It conveys a lot of very high energy, and there is something. It's not quite right. The movement's not quite right, although it's moving very quickly. Yeah, I never considered that he's actually bending reality. That's an interesting point of view to look at it that way from a story perspective. Yeah.
And of course, Clayton Watson does his own voice in it. And at the end of the short, we meet, I think it's Neo and Trinity, right? And both Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss do the voices in that.
Yeah.
Did you like this one, Gary?
So I sure did like this one. This one also, I mean, I feel like I say this on every one. This one actually connects in, but it does connect in because you've got the kid who actually shows up is a character who shows up in the movies.
Yeah,
so that's kind of cool.
And you also know why he is so attached to Neo in The Matrix Reloaded.
Yeah,
because of this story.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like,
I mean, if you see The Matrix Reloaded, we'll talk about it next week, but they hint that Neo pulled him out essentially, or helped to, but this is the full story of how exactly what happened.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, they're taking like elements from the real world. Like you said, the actor, Clayton, they got video of him doing certain things. The skateboarding was done by a guy named Eddie Kim, who is like a YouTuber who does a lot of skateboarding and philosophizing. And
interesting.
So if you check him out on YouTube, but
cool.
Anyway, he's a like a pro skateboarder, like a champion or something initially from that. But
do you like the visual style of this one?
It's interesting. It's weird. It's weird to get the hang of at first, but it was, I was looking up a little bit about that. And, you mentioned Hashimoto, Shinichi Hashimoto, who was like who worked with Watanabe.
Yeah.
And Hashimoto was the one who recommended this style. And
they were basically they discuss that it's based on sort of the initial sketches that an animator works on before they're cleaned up and everything.
Yeah. Watanabe, he felt like it was he was tired of the traditional like way of doing things. He wanted to do something special for this, and Hashimoto recommended the hand-drawn style. He even says himself he's embarrassed that people think it's something so special that he actually pulled that from old stuff. Like you know, this is the old way of doing things basically. And but Watanabe really loved it because he felt like it was personal to the artist, and like it gives even more uniqueness because like depending on who's doing your animation, you know, it's like a completely unique version of this thing. Right. And said it was very tedious, but they had time and a budget, so that's what they did.
It's tedious because I think you have to use double the amount of cells because they have to do the kind of sketchy look and then the color cell underneath that because you can't really color it traditionally.
Yeah, I found that
go in and paint
really fascinating in terms of a production. It was just like, wow. I mean, because we hear a whole lot about, you know, everything that goes into something like a Pixar movie. And this kind of like, they're essentially having to make this movie twice with the amount of work.
Yeah. So in contrast to the style on that, which is very messy, very hand drawn, the animation for a detective story, which is these do not come back to back in the film. I'm just talking about them both together because they were directed by the same guy. It kind of makes sense. So the animation in detective story is much more clean, and it's but not quite traditional because it's rendered in this very stylized, grainy black and white, which I think looks pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I love the animation on Detective Story. It was one of the last ones that was decided on for inclusion in the film. The way that the producer, I can't remember his name, the guy that you mentioned, Gary, he talks about before Detective Story, they had about 20 or so scripts from different writers and directors, but the Wachowskis just weren't satisfied with any of them. So Watanabe came to the Wachowskis and the producers with this idea for a detective story, doing this like film noir kind of thing, and they loved it. So that's what he did. I mean, this cool. It's very much a detective story done in the style of film noir, but set within the world of the Matrix. I mean, you've got obviously modern technology in it because he's, you know, using hackers and things like that. Obviously, it's set within the same time frame as the Matrix, but he definitely gives it more of a steampunky kind of look because there's sort of this melding of new and old technology in his version of this world that I think doesn't fit necessarily with what we've seen of the Matrix, but looks pretty fucking cool for this short.
No, and if you watch like Cowboy Bebop, I mean, that's kind of the Cowboy Bebop very much has like a vibe of like blending like some old style of stuff in like a futuristic setting. And
I mean, even down to his clothes, he's still, you know, trench coat and fedora, but like it's still very much, it's still very much a Matrix story, but could easily fit within any noir category. It's
because awesome. Even the New York that's depicted in this is kind of a very 40s style New York with little bits of new technology, and the story is a pretty straightforward for a while detective story where he's been hired to find a missing woman. That missing woman just happens to be Trinity, and he just happens to have been hired by the machines, by the agents. So it's a fun little twist that ends in a really cool gunfight on a train that I think is really great. And it's Carrie-Anne Moss again playing Trinity.
Yeah,
which is Watanabe's like big driving factor here. I think he mentioned in one of the interviews like he just really wanted to use Trinity in something. So
and even her design, I mean, it's still the same character, but even her design is tweaked just slightly, but it's still like really fresh and looks great. The top, you know, besides the stuff that is directly linked, this is the one that's really kind of special. I really, really enjoyed this one, and there's another one we're going to talk about soon. But
we haven't mentioned Todd Davis in this a lot, but he was really excited about this one too because he scores, I think, all of this.
I think he scores them all, and he gets to do kind of different musical styles for.
He was excited to he's like, oh, I get to do like a 1950s noir movie now.
Yeah. So the next one we'll talk about is Program. Program was directed by an animator named Takashi Kawajiri, a guy who created an anime called Ninja Scroll, which the Wachowskis were big fans of Ninja Scroll. I'm a big fan of Ninja Scroll. I am not a huge anime guy. Admittedly, I just don't know a lot about that world, but there are some of the bigger titles that I'm familiar with. And for some reason, Ninja Scroll was always one of those to me. I remember it coming out on DVD back maybe in the early 2000s when I got it, late 90s, and just really loving the animation style. It's very dynamic. It's very cool looking. And I always loved that. So, and Program is visually pretty cool, I think. So Kawajiri was near the top of the Wachowskis' wish list for directors when they started this project because they were such big fans of Ninja Scroll. And he happened to also be a big fan of The Matrix. So he's like, yeah, I'm willing to direct a segment if I can kind of submit some story ideas of my own. So he came up with 2 stories, actually, Program and World Record, the latter of which was directed by Takeshi Koike. But this one, World Record a little bit, but especially Program is the closest to like traditional anime style character design and things like that, especially in the woman that's in it.
Yeah.
The way that she's depicted.
Yeah. The stuff that's digital in Program is very subtle, and it's mostly background, the way, and we've discussed at length on this show, some of the most successful uses of digital animation is when it's there to just augment whatever else is already on screen. And I think they do a good job of that here, so much so that it's hard to tell what's digital and what's 2D animation. But in terms of use of 2D animation, this is pretty much the bulk of it is 2D. Yeah.
Well, I also like
traditional ink and paint.
This is not the only one where this is the case, but this is the one where it being a Japanese production adds a lot to it. We're going to talk more about that on probably another one here in a minute. But this one, it's set in, at least the scene or the simulation they're in within or the program they're in within the Matrix, this fighting program is in like a feudal Japan, kind of area. And I really love the look of this one. Like character or story wise, it's not the most interesting. I mean, it raises some fun questions, the idea of what, the cipher question, would you turn your back on the truth to go back to an easier life kind of thing, which is kind of the conflict of this one. But man, I think visually it's a beautiful short.
Like 2 of the things they mentioned were ukiyo-e, like I think that's how you pronounce it. It's like scroll paintings back in Japanese, and then also these Hanafuda cards, like playing cards in Japan, like the way that they're the art on them is like what they were going for. But the character designer in this one was Yutaka Minoa, who works a lot with Kawajiri, and they also I was a fan of Ninja Scroll as well. I used to have this channel, we've talked about it a number of times on this podcast, but like N1, so like, and it had Night Flight and all that other stuff, and but anime was always on there. And I remember one of the big ones was Ninja Scroll they always showed, and the other was Vampire Hunter D, which these guys did the sequel to Vampire Hunter D,
Bloodlust.
So I just like their style a lot. Like he's got a very like he pays attention to this traditional Japanese stuff, but then also like you can tell he's a big fan of Westerns as well. Like he and all of this stuff, he's got like a very John Wayne kind of movie thing.
Yeah, there are a couple of moments in this one where they're facing off like they're about to duel, just the way that he frames the characters, where you've got like the hand and kind of hip area of one, the other person in the background, like they're about to duel. It's very Western like.
Yeah, I really like this one too. And, this was a cool one for Todd Davis as well, because you can't use Prodigy, I think is what he said. You can't use Prodigy in medieval times.
Japan.
Yeah. So, that's it's a good one. This one's a lot of fun, just seeing that and dealing, like you said, with that story that like Cypher deals with, just the concept of simulations can also be dangerous. Would you want to just stay in them? And interesting. Star Trek's done that too, with the holodeck and such.
Oh, yeah.
People get
Hey, well, while we're on the subject of Star Trek, Todd,
Yeah.
can you tell us in any of these shorts if we've got any Star Trek guys?
I'm glad you asked. This list is a bit extensive, but I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can. So we already mentioned Kevin Michael Richardson as Thaddeus. Just really quick, he did some Lower Decks and Star Trek Into Darkness and 5 different Star Trek video games. And then we've got Pam Adlon as Jew. She was in an episode of Next Gen, season 3, episode 4, Who Watches the Watchers. Tom Kenny, aka SpongeBob SquarePants, is the operator on Flight of the Osiris, and he's done 4 episodes, and 4 episodes of Lower Decks, he's portrayed 7 characters.
None of them SpongeBob, unfortunately.
None of them SpongeBob, although on Lower Decks it would actually probably fit. Tara Strong has also done 1 Star Trek video game, Orion Pirates, back in 2001. Dwight Schultz as Nanaka in Matriculated, which we haven't discussed yet, but he is known for 1 character in the Star Trek universe, and that's Lieutenant Reginald Barclay, and he's actually played him 6 times on Voyager, 5 times on Next Gen. He was in the First Contact movie in '96, directed by Jonathan Frakes, and 1 video game in 2003. John DeMita as the teacher in Kid's Story was on 1 episode of Star Trek Next Generation. That was season 6, episode 25, Timescape, where he plays a nondescript Romulan. Phil Lamar as Duo in Program. He's done much like Tom Kenny, a bunch of episodes of Lower Decks, playing even more characters. He's done 6 episodes of Lower Decks, portraying 8 different characters, most notably Admiral Freeman, husband of Captain Freeman, father of Ensign Beckett Mariner. And Matt McKenzie as Agent. He's in World Record and Beyond and Detective Story. He's done 2 episodes, 1 of Star Trek Voyager and 1 of Deep Space Nine. Tress McNeil as Kenny and Beyond was in Star Trek Starfleet Academy, the video game from 1997. Terrence T.C. Carson as Clarence from A Detective Story was also in Star Trek Klingon Academy back in 2000. Melinda Clark as Alexa, Matriculated, was in the Star Trek Enterprise pilot episode Broken Bow that I discussed with Gary Horne on the first episode of Computer Resume podcast, available now wherever you get your podcast.
There's the plug.
There it is. Playing the Suliban Saren, and it's not Star Trek, but I thought this was interesting. She was also in Spawn in 1997 as Jessica Priest.
The movie?
The live action movie. Yeah, she plays Priest. Rod Salisbury as Cryon in Matriculated was also in Star Trek Starfleet Command 3 in 2002. And last but not least, Olivia Dabo as Rox in Matriculated was in 1 episode of Star Trek Next Generation True Q, which was season 6, episode 6 in 1992. And that's everybody in Star Trek.
One thing I've really learned by these segments of yours, Todd, is how many fucking Star Trek video games there are.
There's a ton
of video
games.
Yeah. It's absurd how many video games there are. It's kind of dumb, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a lot of PC stuff. It's a lot of like late 90s, early 2000s
nerds
video games. Yeah.
Made for nerds.
I was going to talk about how I remember playing on PC one of the next gen games, but now I don't want to talk about it anymore.
So let's get to World Record. I mentioned earlier that it's directed by Takeshi Koike, but it is by an idea by Kawajiri, or written by Kawajiri. And this one's a pretty cool concept, I think, World Record, because it shows somebody much like the kid who's waking himself up from the Matrix, which I think is kind of a cool concept that's possible just by, like, in this case, just physical and mental determination kind of thing. But one thing about this one is that I really think the animation style is super cool. I love Koike's character design.
It's kind of like the movement from that hand-drawn style in Kid Story, but mixed with like a almost graffiti type style.
It's very
so engaging. I really
think
love
it's
it.
very clearly influenced by the style of by the character designs of Peter Chung, who we'll talk about in a minute.
Yes.
It 100% is. He definitely says that Peter Chung's influential on him. So.
Yeah, I mean, the way he draws, like the just slightly deformed looking people, big hands, you know, like very strange shape, but very dynamic to look at. Koike had been working at Madhouse Studio, which is the studio that Kawajiri worked for. He started working there just out of high school. Like he was kind of a prodigy, and he had been working on a short of his own when other animators at the studio kind of took notice of these unique character designs that he was doing. And when Kawajiri saw that, he knew that this is the guy that he wanted to work on World Record for him. So Kawajiri basically just gave him free reign to do whatever he wanted with his script.
Madhouse is the studio like Manoa and Koike and Kawajiri, all of those guys work for there. All these movies that I was just mentioning before, that's like their studio. But yeah, Koike was like a sort of a student to Kawajiri. And so Kawajiri had been watching him and
Kawajiri-san.
Yeah, Kawajiri-san. And
what he calls him.
Yeah, no, it really is. But yeah, that just but yeah, he definitely mentioned sorry if I'm stepping on you here, but he definitely mentioned that like a lot of what makes him unique, he thinks, is like his use of black. Like he definitely likes these layers of shadows and stuff behind people.
Very thick lines.
Yeah, thick lines and likes subdued music and more in the action realm. Like it just but yeah, he certainly definitely says Peter Chung, like he loves Peter Chung's work.
Mm-hmm. It kind of the Wachowskis' idea to have him fall at the end. That is one suggestion. They didn't write this one, but that was their suggestion. And I think I'm not sure what the original script was, but I can't imagine it going any other direction.
It's actually kind of heartbreakingly beautiful, honestly.
Yeah, they said that
it makes me think of the speech that Morpheus is giving Neo right after Neo's first time in the construct, and he talks. Morpheus talks about the first who was actually able to free himself from the Matrix, and I think that speech, along with World Record and what I think will happen in Matrix 4, is more experiencing the life and adventures of folks who have been able to free themselves from the Matrix, and how that builds an early resistance. But that's my personal opinion on what I think Matrix 4 will be.
Well, I like that idea because it's definitely a unique. I mean, the kid kind of gets there, but you know, like Neo keeps again, spoilers for the next one, but fuck you if you haven't watched it. But
and we appreciate all of our listeners.
Neo keeps telling the kid that you freed yourself, but there's definitely like Neo's involved.
But Neo
this guy is Neo's definitely like talking to him. This guy is just straight up, like Justin said, just like physical will and mental determination and whatever. Like it's
literally like a mind over matter kind of situation, you know.
Yeah, he's like,
he's just on a different plane.
And he said the initial wasn't you're talking about the original script. He said originally the script wasn't focused on the race.
Gotcha.
And so then those guys were like, the Wachowskis kind of had that idea to like make that the bookends of it basically, or something, like that. Yeah, that kind of thing.
I think it was. I think it was a very good idea.
Well, and it's one of the things Kat and I were talking about with the Matrix movie is that she's not super into kung fu fighting type films like that, and I was like, I can understand that, but I think it's the way the Wachowskis approach this violence philosophically. And this actually ties directly into that stuff of being able to, and I've seen this from the world of martial arts. I won't say myself personally, but looking at certain individuals and how they're able to seemingly defy gravity for a second or two, or put their hand through concrete or stuff like that. And you kind of look at that and it's like, I'm bigger than you. I'm stronger than you. I can't do that. And it's all a mental game. And he talks about that briefly with that reporter. It's a feeling like no other, you kind of let yourself go. And this has kind of been like one of the best representations of that.
Yeah.
And one of the most accurate depictions of what that feeling kind of is. It's neat. I really dig it.
It's kind of cool for humanity too. Like this idea that, like he's taken off and all the Matrix shit starts popping up in red, like right in front of him. But, and then he wakes up for like a split second in the whatever it's called, the generator.
The tank. Yeah.
And then the robots
and the machines are like, oh shit.
Yeah. But you get the feeling like the machines like have like something in place for that, because they like catch him like immediately. Like, fuck, put it back. It's like, but it's just interesting that like human will, like this has obviously happened more than once. These people are like popping out,
and they're ready.
So they have to be ready. Yeah.
So the next one is called Beyond, written and directed by Koji Morimoto. Koji Morimoto is a very interesting guy. If you watch him in interviews, I'm a big fan of this guy. He's very eccentric. He was actually the first director approached about the film, but he also took the longest to complete his project. It took 2 years to create this. Contrast that with Final Flight of the Osiris. That groundbreaking CG took 13 months. This took 2 years, this little short. And it's kind of the most inconsequential of the shorts story-wise, but I think it's a beautiful little corner of the Matrix universe. I really like Beyond. I like the animation style. It's basically Thor: The Dark World in plot. And
kind of,
it is essentially the same story as Thor: The Dark World, but
that's fucked up. It's true though.
I'd like to think that Marvel stole that idea from this little short film, this weird little short film from the Animatrix. But it's basically kind of so we'll go back to Morimoto. The reason that it took him so long is because he is like very, very meticulous and, like I said, a little eccentric. But he would keep coming up with ideas and keep having them rejected by the producer, the Wachowskis or whoever. And he'd go back to rewrite. And sometimes he would even they'd like what a story beat change, like a little, not the whole story. Like they liked it, but they're like, oh, let's change this. And he would just throw the whole thing out and start from scratch. So it took him forever to come up with something. And then once he had one that they approved, he meticulously storyboarded the entire short himself. And he is known in Japan as being a notoriously slow storyboarder. So it just took him forever to work on it.
Yeah.
But I really like this one. Story-wise, I think it's a really just like a neat little
kind of
idea.
To me, in trying to encapsulate what it is, it's somewhere between a haunted house movie and like a modern magic thing with kids, almost like Goonies a little bit. Like,
and the haunted house stuff to me makes me think of the Oracle's comments in The Matrix Reloaded. I think it's in Reloaded, where she talks about how like werewolves,
vampires, werewolves, ghosts,
are basically like glitches in the Matrix, and we even see a werewolf in Reloaded. But this also kind of gives you the idea that maybe haunted houses are also a weird little glitch in the Matrix, like the history of haunted houses. That's just something weird going on with the programming and the simulation that we're in.
Yeah, it's a really interesting take to visualize a concept like that. And it's here again, just knocked it out of the park. It's, you know what, it took 2 years, worth the wait. It's awesome.
I love this one. It's one that gets looked over, I think, a lot.
Yeah, I hate myself for how much I like it. And in some of the making of stuff, you seem like filming and like how meticulously he's filming like a model doing like a lot of the movements of the girl and like doing all this stuff. It's kind of neat, but because he talks about like everybody reacts differently, so he wants to capture this like unique thing that only this human will do, and like these like little moments he wants to catch. But yeah, I think like that Mike Harris guy was just like he was the first director we talked to, but it took him 2 years. We spent a year also just talking about it.
I think he called him a producer's nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. He was like, essentially, he's a producer's nightmare. And he's like, I mean, and then he came up with this was the idea he wanted to do about this girl, like finding out he's really. He tells a story like in the making of thing about he remembers being like 3 or 4 and seeing like wood grain on the walls or the ceiling or something and seeing it move or something. And like everybody telling him, no, it's still. And he's like, no, there's something different here. And so he's like really obsessed with what's beyond that wall, what's beyond, what does the light pole do at night when no one's watching it, you know, so he was obsessed with the phenomena aspect of it. And the Wachowskis approved it as long as I think their only note was like, this girl can't cross over. Like she can't cross over into the real world. She has to stay in the Matrix. And so that was it. So he got to focus on that phenomena, but he was doing like ridiculous shit. Like they had to find like a little village that had this traffic signal.
Yes.
He remembered.
Yeah.
And,
it's a very specific song.
Yeah. A song he remembered. It was for like visually impaired people to be able to cross the street or whatever. But
they don't use that tone anymore, right? So they had to like travel to find it.
So they had to travel, like find a small village that still had that song playing so that they could record the song playing for like the street crossing thing.
And he like wanted that. He's like, it has to be this specific song because something in the lyrics thematically
he was saying
worked with what the story he was telling.
Yeah, he was saying that basically if you look at the lyrics, something about the song is basically saying like you're specially selected to cross now or something like that. It's like you're a special person and you can cross. And it's just it was something he had noticed as a child or something.
Yeah.
He just wanted to include here that it felt relevant to what was happening. And
bonus points to any listener who takes a picture with that crossing sign and sends it to us online.
It's just he's a weird dude. And
he is. I like him.
Takeuchi talks about it. It was just like, oh, he's so good, you know, like he's notoriously, you know, long at doing these things. My favorite quote was that Takeuchi said he has a special affinity for alcohol, I think was the exact quote. He has a special affinity for alcohol. He's like, he'll just show up at my house like at least once or twice a year and drink every bottle of wine I have and talk to me about weird stories that he's thought of.
I want to hang out with that guy. He sounds fun. Honestly, he does. All right, so let's get to the last one. Matriculated is the final one, and this one is another one that was kind of a late addition. It was so scheduling conflicts had caused one of the Animatrix directors to have to drop out, which left the project short one director. So the Wachowskis actually recommended Peter Chung, who was the creator of Aeon Flux. Peter Chung has a long history in animation. He was one of the key animators on Rugrats, for an example, but Aeon Flux was kind of like his creation. And Aeon Flux, I don't know if you guys have seen it. I used to watch it back in the late 90s on MTV. I thought it was incredible. I didn't realize this until looking back at it, that it was not very popular at the time, not as far as critically, but as far as like it didn't have a big following or it didn't get a lot of ratings and things like that. I think it was very ahead of its time.
This guy created Charlize Theron.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service, sir.
No, he talks about that like Rugrats is like actually the genesis of Aeon Flux. Is like there's so many things that he wanted to do, but Rugrats was kind of limited because they're like little kids with their squat, short legs, you know.
Yeah, they can't do a whole lot.
And so he designed something that was like very opposite. You know, and it sounds like you watched the same thing, but like Todd McFarlane's a big thing on this. He's like talking about what they decided to do with comics. Like he looked to Peter Chung as like he was doing that same thing with animation, that like he took extra long limbs and big hands and like just weird bodies,
weird lips too. Everyone's got weird lips in his animation.
Oh yeah. Well, and you can really see that to take it a step further especially in some of those early, like in the first 100 issues of the Spawn comic book, and then bleeding over into the Spawn HBO animated series. You see a lot of that animation influence.
Yeah. And Peter Chung, he had a little bit of an advantage because he came onto the project fairly late. So he was pretty much given free reign to do whatever he wanted story-wise, because they just had to get something done. The problem with coming in so late is that he had very little time to complete it. But I think the final product does not look like something that was rushed to completion at all. I really love this segment. I've always really liked Peter Chung's animation style, his character design. I mean, these characters look straight out of Aeon Flux, but it's a little more polished. I mean, this is a few years later in technology, but he's also got some CG in there. Like the machines in this are CG, but they're not quite as 2D cell animated looking as the ones in the Second Renaissance, but they don't stand out like a sore thumb, I don't think, like they could. But I also just love the story of this one. I think this is one of the most thought-provoking of any of the shorts, because it's essentially about humans trying to convert machines to fight for humanity and sort of creating a matrix for machines. It gets very psychedelic. It's very, very odd, very out there, but I think it's
it's a really fascinating concept.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah. He definitely said that, like, his idea was like, what if a machine entered a human's dream, like just
that's very, very apt. Yeah.
And the machines, the way he creates them, they're not the design of the machines that we see in any of the Matrix movies. They're very different, but the way that they're designed, you do get a little bit of humanity out of them. Like they don't have eyes necessarily, but they kind of do. Like the main one that that they're converting, that they have to rescue, he I don't know his gender, but that robot he kind of has these two little like camera things that kind of give him the look of eyes, so it creates some sympathy in it. Even though I don't know, it's a really, really interesting short. I think I really like this one, and it gets very strange, but it's a very, I think the animation's very dynamic and very just fun to watch. So you've got that on top of a very thought-provoking story, and I think it's a hell of a way to end.
I was just gonna say, like, the eyes thing you're talking about is funny, because I think anime is like traditionally pretty focused on eyes, like that eyes, the eyes are the windows to the soul and all that stuff. Like the good characters have like big giant eyes, and and then like generally the villains are like very like squinty and weird, and but anyway, go ahead, Todd.
Well, I was just going to say, in reading the book Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, he talks about iconography and being able to identify with something that, the more specific something is, the less you're actually able to identify with it. And in looking at the artwork, the character design, the human character designs are pretty specific. We've got about half a dozen characters. They all have very specific looks. Whereas the robot that they are trying to convert doesn't speak, so doesn't have a specific voice, and its, for lack of a better term, face is so minimalistic in its features that I think it's actually it's actually easier for the audience to maybe identify with the robot than it is the humans, because you're able to,
it's really the robot story.
Yeah, it's the robot story. So, while this isn't my favorite of the 9 films, like, it's a really fascinating exploration in viewer psychology and how we perceive ourselves and project ourselves onto, the perceived villain. And it's learning about humanity and all that stuff. And what it's shown is some of the basic influences and drives of humanity, the idea of love and curiosity and pursuit and all that stuff. It's a fascinating exploration. I really enjoy it.
So you said this is not your favorite. It's not my favorite either, but it's up there for me. I think the Second Renaissance is probably my personal favorite overall. Although I do really like World Record a lot, and I like Beyond a lot, just as their own little kind of offshoots of the main story. But I think that the Second Renaissance is the one that really gives this whole project reason to exist. It really truly expanding on the world of the films.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a favorite? What is your favorite?
I am really fond of Detective Story. I really dig it. Yeah. The aesthetic, the music, even the look, and we've discussed it at length already, so I won't recount, but like, man, it strikes a chord with me. I really dig it. I love all of these, but if I had to nail down just good. One,
some are better than others, but they're all pretty, like, varying degrees of good.
I'd never watched the Animatrix before.
You had never seen it before?
No, I'd never seen it before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was impressed with how much I actually liked each one. It made me legitimately think like we should totally do like a evolution of anime or some sort of story for like people like us who maybe don't watch anime all the time.
Yeah.
To like get to like what is the essential, like what's the travel guide to getting from then to now.
Yeah. The essential viewing.
Yeah. I'd be into that. That might be a future series we work on.
But if I had to pick one, gun to head, I guess, I think Renaissance is Second Renaissance is probably just the most interesting, just because you get the story. But I actually really liked Kid Story. I dug it.
Cool.
And not the least of which is like, I think even in the grave, his name is Michael Karl Popper, and I actually am a big fan of Karl Popper, who's a philosopher, and
oh wow, I didn't know
secretly like reading, and so like that like I popped for that at the end. I was like, oh, he's Karl Popper, and that's cool. And but yeah, I think Kid Story actually is because it's just so weird, and just I don't know, I enjoyed watching it. It's kind of interesting to me, and unfortunately, reviewers didn't like that, but that's too bad. But they
didn't like that one.
Yeah, I saw some negative stuff on Kid Story.
Yeah, so I wasn't planning necessarily on doing this since this is a bonus episode. But do you guys have any further viewing? Do you know anything you would pair with this one or something?
It didn't dawn on me until we were actually talking about it, because part of the reason I chose Detective Story is I think it would be in the style of the old films that you would watch in the cinema that would have a cartoon ahead of them.
Yeah.
I kind of would love,
which is what they did with Final Flight of the Osiris.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of like the idea of maybe seeing a Detective Story ahead of either one, really, of the Blade Runner films. I think that would be a really nice
similar
pairing.
Aesthetic. Yeah. Neo noir. It's a future noir in Blade Runner, but and that would work really well.
I don't know how you dance around not mentioning like heavy metal or something.
Yeah, as far as another anthology film, I think heavy metal is a pretty good choice. I thought immediately of Batman Gotham Knight.
Nice.
Batman Gotham Knight is a very similar concept. Also by Warner Brothers. So I'm pretty sure that Warner Brothers was like, hey, that worked for Matrix. Let's do this. Because I think Gotham Knight came out 5 years later, because it came out in between
first and second
Dark Knight movie. But it's basically the same thing. In fact, some of the same studios, like Madhouse, Studio 4C, like they were involved. Some of the same animators that were involved in the Animatrix. I remember at one point, when around the time it was released, like people were actually, it was a blatant comparison to the Animatrix. People were calling it like the Batimatrix, like it's like 5 or 6. It's not as many segments. I think it's 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
Animated Batman stories by different, mostly Japanese animation studios. Although they were all written by like comic book guys like David S. Goyer, Brian Azzarello, Greg Rucka, guys like that wrote the segments. But
I was going to say, I can't see Christopher Nolan giving anywhere close to a shit.
Oh no,
like
I don't think he was
Wachowskis
involved at all
with this. Like Christopher Nolan's like, what? I don't
even think he's technically listed as a producer or anything on it. So it's definitely not as meticulous in its like whether it's canon or not. But
it is, the connections to the Dark Knight trilogy are loose at best.
Yeah. But it's still a very similar concept, and one that I think is pretty is well worth watching.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's really good. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember it being really good. And you've got Kevin Conroy as Batman, so
tough to go wrong.
I do have somebody needs a nap. If you,
do you?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know we were doing a real whole episode.
It feels like we are now. But we're just in it now. Because despite how hard you try to wake up from the Matrix, some of the people, you'll tell them they need to take a nap. I just made that up on the spot. You're welcome.
Good job. Congrats, Gary.
This is from Tara M for Murder. Says terrifying nightmare from which the only escape is turning off the TV. Makes you think animation itself is evil. Has lots of interesting parts, cool images, tinges of humanity, whatever you want to call it. Rob says 1 star, 90% embarrassing garbage with one fun story about how the robots revolted. It's called The Second Renaissance Part 1 and 2, and you can find it on YouTube. Skip the embarrassing underwear woman with a sword story and the awful heroic Matrix by suicide story, which is something we haven't discussed.
Wow. Yeah.
That was one of the things people hated. Really? Carl Hudson says backstory theories and metaphors explained from the Matrix universe, written by what seems like a horny 14-year-old trans kid on Tumblr. Wow. Some of it is impressive, but it's boring, awful, and not something I wish was an official part of the Matrix universe or a film released by a studio. Just mostly a complete mess, especially so when your best short is the one that can inspire people to kill themselves so they can wake up in the Matrix. In my opinion, that's a dangerous message, especially considering this universe's place in culture, appealing to young, misunderstood men. And then finally, Made Geeky says, this is one of the most 90s edgelord things I've ever had the honor of watching in a very long time. Most of the writing was lackluster and boring. Only one of them added anything interesting or original to the lore. All but one of the ones that had interesting ideas failed miserably at executing them. All but 2 of them had half-naked women for literally no reason. Time is not an excuse for any of these failings. I've seen clever writing and good character work done in 10 minutes, so there's no reason that these should fail. I don't understand how someone could be given the entire Matrix sandbox to play in, and the best they could do is this.
Well, I don't think I watched the same movie as that person. But, yeah, I mean, those are rough. But when it came out, I remember the reviews being generally pretty good. And it made a decent amount of money. I mean, it sold, like we said, DVDs were booming at the time. And it sold like 2.5 million copies, made $68 million in sales revenue. So that's not too shabby, for a movie that could have been pretty bad if it had not been executed as well as this one, because this concept could go either way. We've seen plenty of anthology films, whether animated or not. Even, we talked about heavy metal. Some of those, not all of those are winners. Everything in heavy metal is not a winner. And same with like Creep Show or any other anthology movie. I just watched VHS 94 and they're all, pretty decent, but none of them, they're not all like blowing your mind. And so this could have gone the other direction, but I think it's a pretty cool experiment that worked out pretty well for the Wachowskis and for Warner Brothers. And I would honestly like to see more of it. I think with stuff like Netflix, I think HBO Max would be the place for it since that's Warner Brothers. But if they wanted to do a series like what Disney's doing with Star Wars or what they're doing with Marvel stuff, that they could expand upon the world of the Matrix in ways that aren't explicitly linked to like Neo and Trinity and Morpheus's saga, do something more akin to like Mandalorian. That's Mandalorian season 1, I should say. That's a little more on the outskirts of the story, but still expanding upon the universe.
Do you think if Matrix 4 is as successful as it could be, we might get that?
I guarantee you the conversations are happening. Because when something makes that kind of money, people always look for ways for it to make even more money for them. Hell, they're working on a John Wick spinoff series. Keanu Reeves isn't involved. He doesn't need to be. because the world of those films is fascinating enough to spawn its own stories. And The Matrix is clearly the same situation. I mean, there are hundreds of stories you could tell within the world of The Matrix, whether it's the real world or The Matrix itself. This is 9 of them, but there's a lot of different directions you could go in with these.
That's exactly what people should be. I mean, that's what streaming services and studios are looking for. I mean, just what can we mine the most stories from? And really with The Matrix, I mean, you even have to wonder, shit, man, it could be Westworld for that matter. Like it could just be like, what reality does this person choose to like? Like, could you put a Western in The Matrix? Could you, like all of that stuff, like it doesn't have to be. I mean, clearly there's programs, as we saw from Program, where you could be in like ancient Japan or whatever, but like there's
what if somebody was put into one of those programs unknowingly and that was just their reality?
Right. There's like literally no limit to the amount of settings and scenarios that you could create within The Matrix. And then, there's plenty of world outside of it to pull from as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's about all I got for this episode. This is a bonus episode that I think is going to be about the length of a regular episode, but there was a lot to talk about with the Animatrix. There's a lot of conversation. This world is a very rich world to deep dive into. So we'll be back next week with a regular episode in this series with The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions. We're going to talk about those as a single episode, single story, because if you've seen the movies, they are basically one big movie cut in half.
Yeah.
the first one certainly does not wrap anything up at all. So that's how we're going to discuss them here. So do you guys have anywhere, where do you guys want to let our listeners know to find you on the internet?
Matt, this is Gary Horne. I got excited about it.
You're right up on that mic.
What else are you excited to share with the listeners, Gary?
This is pro
like
wrestling,
a show or
podcast.
something?
Like
oh yeah. I mean, at TIPW show.
He doesn't need to promote it on here because his show is so much more popular than this one that he feels that it's unnecessary.
No, it's not that. It's just
AVP, always be promoting.
Well, listen, I mean, the thing is honestly what I'm thinking about is like we're planning like a relaunch of This Is Pro Wrestling because it's kind of been dead for like a few months now because we've been doing actual stuff and like, I mean, I, that even sounded jerky. Like, I mean, just we've been doing other projects. And so like, we're trying to figure out how to make our own thing. And still, since the National Wrestling Alliance has taken everything we were doing and it's now just within their realm and sphere, like, how do you make another thing again outside of that, basically?
Stay
but
tuned,
at TIPW show.
Stay tuned for that, I guess.
Todd,
if you like Star Trek, you can follow me as I host a rotating panel of guests, and we discuss the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old. It's called Computer Resume Podcast, and it's available wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow me at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials, and the show is at Computer Resume on all of the socials.
All right, I am at Justin_Bishop, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. Find the show at Cinema_Shock on Twitter and Instagram, or find us at cinemashock.net. You can find all of our shows, our merch, links to all of our social media profiles, Facebook, like us there, Discord, go join us there. Until next week.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Are you trying to do a Morpheus thing? What was that?
I don't know. Yes.
Be excellent to each other. Yes.
Yes.
In the beginning, there was man, and for a time it was good. But humanity's so-called civil societies soon fell victim to vanity and corruption. Then Johnny made the keys in his own likeness. Thus did Johnny become the architect of his own demise.
That I don't know if that guy's still alive, whoever played that role, but we should get him. Just be like, your one character has got more mileage from Todd Davis. Ever before. This is fantastic, Johnny. Johnny has the skis, though. We do know that.
Yep.